Aloha and welcome to our video on the nervous system. In this video, we'll describe the structures and functions of the nervous system, we'll describe the function of the spinal cord, and then we'll talk about the 5 sensory receptors. So here we can see a picture of the nervous system. It has the brain and the spinal cord, as well as all of the peripheral nerves in it. And that basically makes up what the nervous system is. Now here I wanted to show you just a little bit more about the brain. We can see that we have the spinal cord here and the brainstem, which attaches it. We have the cerebellum down below, and then the rest of it is the cerebrum, and that'll be broken down into the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. The lessons that you'll go through will go and tell you more detail what each of these parts of the brain does. I just wanted you to get an overview of where they are. Okay, so here we can see the areas of the brain that we just kind of showed you real fast, and we'll go over their function a little bit. We have the brain stem we talked about, and this is what controls the autonomic systems of our body, like our heart rate, digestion, our breathing, the things we don't think about but we need to have happening for us to live. We have the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is what controls balance and helps our muscles work together. We have the limbic system, which is where we generally focus our emotions, and especially the stronger ones like anger and pleasure. In the diencephalon, we have the thalamus, which directs the incoming sensory information. So it kind of works as a filter and tells it where it needs to go. We also have the hypothalamus, which regulates a lot of our endocrine system, our glands, and modifies our body temperature, kind of maintains that homeostasis that we talk about often. We also have the cerebral cortex, and in the cerebral cortex is where we find our 4 lobes of the brain, and this is where we have our vision, hearing, thinking, memory. This is our thought processes. So those are the basic parts and functions of the brain. And here we'll take a quick look at a nerve cell or a neuron. Now, the nerve cell has its nucleus, so it does have some genetic material. Coming off of this area, we find the dendrites. The dendrites are kind of like a receptor. It's what brings things in, sends that message down the axon here, where we'll see more little spread outs here, and we have a synapse, which is the gap. And in this synapse is where we don't have any contact. What we do is this part here is all sent through like an electrical journey till it gets to the synapse. And then we release a neurotransmitter. So a neurotransmitter is going to be released here. And what it'll do is it'll drift across the synapse, get picked up here in the dendrites, and then it'll send that electrical current down to the next one. And that's how the neurons work. This axon here, which can stretch out quite a distance, it's generally going to be sheathed, and that'll kind of work as an insulation to keep it working a little bit better and not misfiring or causing other things to fire as well. Okay, so let's begin a quick discussion on the senses, and the first one we'll talk about is touch. Now, when we talked about the skin earlier, we talked about the outer layer of the epidermis, the inner layer, the hypodermis, or the fatty layer, and then we also mentioned this middle layer of the dermis where we find a lot of things hanging out in there. And it is in here where we find our different sense organs for the skin. So we can have thermoreceptors, which are going to sense heat. We'll have a Meissner's corpuscle, which senses touch. We have the nociceptor here, which will sense pain. And then we have the Pacinian corpuscle here, which senses pressure. So you can kind of see as we're going through there that we have all these different ways and all these different components that fall back into this sense of touch that we have. Okay, next up is our sense of smell and our sense of taste. And these two come together because they're interrelated to each other. What we notice is that we have these little particles. So whether it's a taste bud or whether it's going to be in our nose, we have these little airborne particles or food chemicals that are going to come in there. They hit these receptor cells here, and as they hit the receptor cells, it'll send an impulse to the nerve fibers in the brain. And the brain will then process, okay, what is it that we're talking about? What are these things that we're getting receptions on? And it'll start putting together an image of what it is that we're tasting. Taste generally is going to be limited to things like sweet and sour, things of that nature. Our smell tends to be a little bit more where we start creating a pattern that'll be there. Okay, let's talk about our last two senses, sight and hearing. Sight occurs here in the eye, so it's dealing with light. So light will enter the eye through the pupil till it gets to the lens, where it will be focused and projected back to the retina. And in the retina, we have two kinds of receptor cells. We have rods and cones, which will take that image that's formed on the retina and send it to the brain along the optic nerve. Hearing occurs in the ears, and there's several different parts of the ear that we want to talk about real quickly. The first is this outer ear. Your outer ear is basically a funnel. It just collects these sound waves and directs them into the ear canal where they'll go back until they hit the eardrum. The eardrum's attached to three little bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and it kind of amplifies and corrects those vibrations off the eardrum and sends them to the cochlea, where we have a bunch of specialized auditory receptor cells in there that'll generate a stimulus that goes back into the auditory nerve. So now the brain has that signal that it can look at and process and see what we're hearing. So in summary, when we're talking about the nervous system, it's going to be made of the brain, which was up here, our spinal cord, which is the main thoroughfare for a lot of this information, and then it reaches out through these neurons, these peripheral nerves that we see out here. We also have the sense organs in here, and we talked about those really well. And what the function of the nervous system was is to coordinate and control movements and responses. So it takes in the stimuli that we get from the world, processes it, and sends out the appropriate responses. It also works as communication for various parts of the body. So that's the importance of the nerve system. As always, the lessons will go into a little bit more detail with you guys, so good luck on those, and we'll see you in the next video.